Learning, especially technical subjects, can be daunting, and it's very easy to feel stupid or to feel like you just don't have it. But in reality, this is not the case. You simply were never taught how to study. But what about we get your power back? Learning or performing well doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be something that is just for special people with special learning talents. Learning how to learn is arguably one of the best things that you can acquire for yourself, because it will basically teach you how to become a top performer in any of the skills that you want to acquire, and also to a whole lot of personal growth. So today, I want to share some of the techniques that I use both in high school and in university that allow me to get an astrophysics major, that I hope will make your learning much easier and much more efficient. We need to start by defining what learning actually is, because that's the biggest difference between learning at a high school level and learning at a university level. That's also why some people tend to have a shock when they go from primary education to higher education. When you're in high school, the majority of the examination papers that you take are based purely on the content that you consume, which basically means that you only need to consume either what the professor tells you or whatever is on the textbook, and then you're able to find basically all the answers that you need for your examinations paper over there by consuming that content. When you're taking university examinations, on the other hand, you will find that it's very unlikely to find a direct match between what the professor has said or whatever it was given on workshops or whatever is on the textbook with what is actually on the examination paper. When you do approach a university level examination, the learning that you want to build is mostly self-made and independent, that you're able to get some key concepts and apply them in original ways to new problems or try and come up with more creative solutions. I believe that the very first thing that you should do is try to understand what type of learner you are, because defining how you learn best is going to directly translate into how you take notes or how you approach the study material in a way that is more efficient to you individually. If you are a visual learner, for example, you will find that it's much easier to take notes and to remember information if, for example, you color code the notes that you're taking, or if you draw diagrams or pictures, etc. On the other hand, if you are an auditory learner just like me, you will understand the majority of information when they are given in an auditory format. That could be YouTube videos, it could be through lectures, through hearing someone speaking, or through having conversations. If you are a kinesthetic learner, on the other hand, you might find it useful to fidget with your hands or to walk around the room while you're trying to study, so that you can connect that motor skills with whatever it is that you're learning. And that also relates to how you take notes. You might be somebody who really struggles to find connections between topics right away. If that's the case, you might find it useful to have bullet points or to write down little simple diagrams, having arrows that show the connections between whatever it is that you're studying. If you are somebody like me, you cannot study from something that is very short and simple, so you might need something that is more structural and full of details so that you can understand better the concept in itself. After you figure out what kind of learner you are, you want to start with why. It means that you have to become the most inquisitive person in the room. If I have, for example, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, I have two options. I can either look at this sentence and be like, okay, I will just memorize the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Or I will ask myself, okay, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Why? Oh, because it produces ATP. Okay, but why? Because ATP is the energy currency of the cell. Okay, but why? Because ATP is the energy currency of the cells, and that energy is exchanged for work within the body. Now you gain a deeper understanding of whatever it is that you read, you can start making connection with something that is very logical to you, that you really understand well. So in the example that we went through before, we found out that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell because it produces ATP, which is a form of energy. That energy is exchanged for work within the body. I exchange energy for work, so it's kind of like money, it's kind of like the currency of the cell. So in the real world, we use money to pay for somebody to provide work. Now, not only we ask ourselves really deeply why something is happening, but we also manage to relate it to something that we already know and it's really logical to us. So it would be really hard for us to forget how that process works. I will even give you a real life example, but right now I'm trying to write my research proposal for a PhD in astrophysics. So I read some paper and I was like, okay, so there is a problem with black holes' arrive redshift. Why? Because they cannot be explained by the ad infinitum limit. Why can they be explained? Because right now the growth mechanisms that we know of are TDEs. And probably, unless you're really passionate about astrophysics or you're a graduate yourself, you probably didn't understand much of what I just said. But that was on purpose because basically that is what happens when you go from high school to university. And it's also the reason why a big chunk of people feel stupid whenever they make the switch, because suddenly they're not able to understand anything. And that's also the reason why you need priming. Whenever you enter university, it is not the teacher's job anymore to provide you guidance throughout your learning. For most university professors, teaching is not their primary source of income, and most of the study that you do is independent, which means that when you enter a university level class, the type of material that you're consuming is not meant to be easily accessible and easily understood. It's meant to be highly technical. Now, let me put it into perspective for you. What I said before is basically this. There are these big objects in our universe which are called black holes, which are basically like big vacuum machines. Whenever there is material that is too close to it, it gets eaten. It gets inside the black holes, and as it gets inside the black hole grows. It's just like us. We eat something and then that something adds to the weight in our body. It's exactly the same thing. Whenever it eats material around it, it increases its mass. You can eat that fast. There is like a limit to how fast you can eat. For example, you will never be able to eat 3 steaks in under 5 seconds, right? It's the same things for black holes. So there is a problem because when we look at black holes that are really ancient, there are black holes that are way too heavy for how fast they can eat. This is a problem because it means that either we don't know what's going on, or these black holes can just eat at a much higher rate than we thought was possible. So now that I gave you the context, understanding what I said before is not that hard, is it? Which is why priming is extremely important. Priming is basically the process of entering a classroom, having already acquired the amount of information that you need to have a general understanding of the topic before you integrate the technical language. So if I were a learner, I wouldn't be able to understand right away what I said the first time. I will need to use the second explanation first, which is much simpler, which gives me way more background before I introduce the technical language. Then I will understand ancient black holes in technical language is black hole at a high redshift, and then immediately makes much more sense. That can be done through watching YouTube videos or reading very simple books. Sometimes professors do make it available, like for example for quantum field theory, when I had to study that, one professor created a book called Quantum Field Theory as Simply as Possible. That was the perfect priming source for a university student. What you want to get is a bird's eye view of whatever it is that you're learning. Then you're able to understand how concepts relate to each other. I did not use priming when I was in high school. I did not find that necessary. But when you enter university, that becomes really a number one priority if you don't want to struggle that hard when you study. The next thing that you want to do is immediately apply your knowledge after you consumed a resource. So it can be after you read a book, or after you watch a YouTube video, or after you watch a lecture, or after you attend a class. You want to immediately go, even for just like 5-10 minutes, try to recollect as much as you possibly can from the class that you just watched, so that you just don't forget whatever it is that you learned. So for example, you went from math class and you cover integrals, then after the class finishes, or as soon as you go back home, the first thing that you want to do is, okay, we cover integrals, what are integrals? And then you try to think about it for like 5-10 minutes and try to recollect whatever it is that the professor said. I mean, this makes a huge difference when you go home and you open a book and you try to consume the same type of information. And this goes for all kinds of subjects, whether it is a humanities subject or a very technical subject. It's really important to try and recall immediately, because that's the time where the informations are the freshest. And it will also take the least amount of friction to try to recollect those informations, and it's the first step to actually long-term memorization. And to tie into the concept of immediate recall, another thing that I really do recommend is to check your understanding of whatever it is that you just consumed or you just read by talking out loud. I know that I always talk about talking out loud on this channel, but because it's really useful. It just means to like try to recollect the topic that you just read by talking to yourself or even by teaching to somebody else. I think that's what they call Feynman technique. But what I found is that you don't necessarily need to have somebody who is actively there. This is basically the one technique that I use all throughout my high school, and I generally only studied the day before in high school, and this was enough for me, except for technical subject, because when it comes to math you really do need to do your exercises. When it comes to subjects that are really full of things to remember and details and dates and technical terms, the best thing is to active recall out loud. And this is basically just taking your research, taking your book, whatever it is that you just read, just try to repeat that to yourself and to check your understanding by saying whatever it is that you learn. And I highly recommend that to do in sections. So for example, if you have a book that you're going through, you want to go through like, I don't know, 5 pages, 10 pages, and then start actively, or maybe like one chapter, and then start actively recalling whatever it is that you just read. So for example, if I have this book about thermodynamics, I will take maybe 3-4 pages, 5 pages, and then I would start saying, okay, if this part talks about the pressure, what is the pressure? The pressure is blah 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 blah. And then basically I would just go through all the content that I just read, trying to check my understanding in the meantime. And it's especially useful if you have somebody around that you can, tell this to. All throughout high school I had my mom, but I would be like, oh, hey mom, I know you're busy, and she'll be doing chores around the house or doing her stuff for work, whatever, and I would be like, okay, while you do your thing, can I just be around you, just telling you whatever it is that I'm studying? And she would be like, yeah, sure, whatever. So she would go ahead and do whatever it is that she needed to do, and in the meantime I would basically be talking to her, which having something moving was way better than just talking to a wall, because it helped keeping my focus. And at the same time, every once in a while she would be like, wait, you said something interesting, can you explain this to me better? Or she will ask random question because her attention was suddenly focused on whatever it is that I just said. So I would be kept on my toes to try and answer her questions based on my abilities, which is also a great way to check your understanding. Try to answer as many questions as possible, especially if you can answer them from people. So if you have people in real life that you can help, other people at your university, other people in your high school that can, review the content with you, they can ask you questions of things that maybe they didn't understand properly, or even doing things like going on Quora or Reddit and answering questions that other people have will force you to get a much deeper understanding and build engagement with the content that you're studying. Then of course, especially at university level, the best thing that you can do to understand yourself is to teach. But I don't think that that's really something that everybody can do, which is why I think that like going online and just trying to answer questions to other people, you can do it through website forums or whatever, can also be really effective if you want to go through this route. A big tip when it comes to technical subject is do not skip your lectures. I know that it's really hard to do, but even if you skip the lecture, at least watch something, like watch the recording, watch a YouTube video, whatever, because I noticed that whenever I did not watch the lecture beforehand, even though I put the exact same amount of work in exercise and revision, my grades would just plummet down. So for example, in my last year of high school, I noticed that in math, my grades throughout the year were pretty much stable. So it happened that during a month I got sick and I couldn't really go to class. So I missed out on most of my teacher's explanation. I was still consuming YouTube and content and trying to do exercises by myself. And even though I put the exact same amount of work, I did exercises like I always did, my grade at the end dropped down significantly. And the only thing that changed was me not attending in-class teaching. So I would highly encourage you to watch the lectures, even if they are recordings, or watch as much things as you can. Now that I've talked about things that should work pretty much for everybody, I want to give some practical tips for different kind of people. For technical subjects, you do have to do your exercises. I mean, you cannot expect to become good at math without, practicing math. Just like a musician cannot expect to become good at an instrument without ever touching one. I think there is a specific framework that can really help speed up learning, and that is to perform the following actions in this specific order. The first is listen, which means listen to the lectures, as I said before, listen to the professor's teaching, listen to YouTube videos, and try to get a general understanding what it is that is being taught. Second part is take notes. And when it comes to taking notes, we go back to what I said at the beginning. It needs to be very specific to the type of learner that you are. When you go back home and you do your first study session, the first thing that you should be aiming for is to do that recall that we talked about, and then you want to do the first exercise immediately. This could be redoing an exercise or an example that was done in class. You could even do your first exercise if you're really hardcore while the professor is talking. If he's going through example in class, try to solve the problem before he gives you the solution. And then after you cover this first basic step, afterwards, during your study session, you can now focus on exercises. Hopefully by this stage, because you did immediate active recall, most of the technical things that you really need to solve the problem should be covered. You should be able to recall and kind of like understand like the gist of it. So it's more important that rather than just focusing on learning the technical language, you start to work on progressively harder and harder exercises as you go. You want a really good book with a lot of exercises and with full solutions, which I find is like one of the biggest problems in university. They give you like really good books, but none of them has solutions to the problem. They just have like the problem. How are you supposed to check whether you're actually progressing if they don't give you the practical step that you're supposed to follow to see whether you were correct or not? Try to find a really good resource with lots of exercises with full solutions that you can work through. I want to give you one last tip, and this is in case you really do struggle focusing. Sometimes it's really easy for me to focus, and this is usually the time where I don't spend much time on my phone. Whenever I start scrolling more and more, it gets increasingly harder for me to focus on whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'm more prone to distractions. So if this is the case and I really need to get something done, I actually have a system, and I call it the spotlight system. It's something that I came up with to reduce the stimuli to the minimum and basically create a spotlight around whatever it is that I'm doing. But it really calms you down so much and reduces the stimuli so much so that you can focus much better. When you're trying to do an intense study sesh, you have to do everything in your power for your brain to believe that it's a different time of the day when there are no people around you. Either it's the dead of night or it's very early in the morning without it actually being dead of night or really early in the morning. The way you do that is I make my room as dark as possible. So I close all the blinds, turn off all the light. That door over there, I try to cover that up so I don't see the light coming from that area. I just turn on those lights behind me, and I turn on the blue light setting like I done now, because blue light increases alertness. I close all the tabs on my laptop, and I only leave one tab open, which is the tab that I need to use to work or I need to Google stuff. I will turn on my lamp, and this will be basically my only source of light, and I will point it directly only at the thing that I'm writing or the exercise that I'm doing or the book that I'm using. It's basically like kind of like what they do in theaters when they turn on the lights precisely on something, precisely on somebody who is talking. All your attention is on that person who is doing the act. It's not on, you know, other people on stage that are moving around randomly because you can barely see them. Sometimes if there are also some noises around me, I will also put some noise cancelling headphones on, and I will specifically put black noise in because I find that the lower the frequency, the better is the insulation that it gives, kind of, and also the smaller the distraction is, because I find that sometimes when I put white noise on or other types of noise or music, it's really hard to like focus on my thinking or focus simply on the task. Whereas if I put some very low frequency, the lower the frequency the better, the easier it is for me to hear my thoughts and to actually walk through the process. So this is like a little tip that I learned. Sometimes I would even go as far, if I really cannot focus, as to just put a blanket on my head so that I can only focus on my laptop. But I know it sounds weird, but if you really have trouble focusing, this really helps because it reduces all the stimuli around you, and it basically creates a space where it's just you and whatever it is that you have to get done. So this is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it and you found something useful, and I'll see you the next time. Bye bye.